Aujourd'hui, merci d'être là. C'est aujourd'hui la deuxième séance de la version en ligne du séminaire IDEE. On aura dans un mois une présentation de Thomas Villemontex qui est avec nous. Et puis le mois suivant, on aura à nouveau une séance plénière comme sur le même format que la première en octobre, qui sera, je ne sais pas si on l'avait déjà dit, qui portera sur les mathématiques. Donc on vous donnera le programme très, très vite maintenant, puisque c'est dans pas très longtemps. Donc je vais vous présenter un papier. Je vais faire la présentation en anglais, peut-être simplement parce que les slides sont en anglais, alors c'est sans doute un petit peu plus simple. Peut-être qu'il y a des anglophones, je ne sais pas. So I'm going to present a paper written with Simon, Eric, Sandra, Jenny et Daniel from different places, because it's very much an international paper where we have run an experiment in different countries. Exactly along the same lines in terms of the randomization protocol, the intervention, and with one exception, important exception, the data collection. So I think it's quite interesting to have an international comparative, potentially comparative experiment. So I wanted to present this. So let me share my slides. I can see them. Yeah. There we are. Wait a minute. Yeah. Excuse me. Can you see them? Do you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so it's a paper about civic education. So very clearly the motivation is around the situation that we're living in, with a lot of doubts about how much people believe in democracy, in science, the polarization of opinions and society, and also the rising participation gap into democracy, or at least maybe the rising discrepancy in terms of the forms of participation in democracy that people take. So that's the context. And if you think of that, you think that maybe civic education has a role to play here. It's not at all new. Education systems have for long, and it's going to be the case of the three countries, Spain, Greece, and France, that we have in this experiment. They have had for a long time a formalized civic education program in the education system. But typically after the Paris terrorist attack, there has been a movement of thinking further about this civic education at the European level. A number of pieces of papers have been produced in order to renew civic education and insist on the importance that it may have in this new context after the Paris attacks. And this experiment is very much in the context of that renewed interest. So the kind of question we want to ask is, are there effective ways to teach civic education in our societies, given that there is a literature on the effectiveness of civic education, but it's not like very one-sided. And in particular, there is a question on whether the practices, the approach to teaching civics education typically, and this is obviously the case in those countries, is too vertical, from teacher to students, and may not be very effective for the kind of societies that we are in. So that's the general context for this. And what we do in this paper is, so we have this large-scale experiment in 3 countries that are very different. You see that at the end of the day, this is not going to be a strong source of difference. And maybe that's a surprise, but these countries are pretty much different in terms of their history, their colonial history, the place of religions and minorities in those countries, and also in terms of their tradition in civic education. And the project that's called Active Citizenship Project, ACT, is one that offers an intervention in civic education that is very much centered around the students. So it's in middle schools, and what characterizes it is that it's very much student-centered pedagogy that seems to be something a bit unusual. Maybe it's a paradox, but a bit unusual, at least in those countries. Because in those countries, the standard way to teach civic education is giving you knowledge about the institutions, the law, the history, etc., and it's quite vertical. And what the program that was testing is very participatory and trying to empower students. In a nutshell, and I give in a bit more details about the actual nature of the experiment, but in a nutshell, students choose democratically a project, a civic-oriented project that they implement over the year. Examples, I give more examples in a moment, so maybe I don't want to insist on that. And teachers are trained to organize and monitor and make happen these activities. And the objective of the project is to promote students' sense of civic sense, and also possibly to change their behavior. And the question we ask is, at the end of the day, very simple: can we improve youth civic in certain dimensions that we can measure by relying on this kind of pedagogy? So let me go through the details. That's the general setup, and I give you the findings when the time comes. So let me be more detailed about the intervention. So there is a training process and then the implementation of the project. So a cross-country, so that was quite extraordinary. In fact, we had a cross-country Ministry of Education work group that worked on this project. In fact, England was also in the group. But it so happens that the experiment in England did not work out very well. Recruitment of schools was very difficult. Surveys were very difficult. So we dropped entirely the English part of the experiment, but they belonged to the work group initially. So those 4 ministries, they met and they defined entirely an intervention their aim was do something new in terms of civic education, test it, and see what we think about it. And those 4 guys, Greeks, French, Spanish, and English, they worked together to define a very detailed program and process and rules and all the elements of the intervention. And then they agreed to test exactly this in a similar fashion in the different countries. So there was so they set up a 2-day teacher training that happened at the beginning of the year. So teachers would follow that 2-day teacher training, and they were trained into how to implement, what was the idea of what should be implemented and how to implement it. And then after the training, the citizenship project was designed and implemented by the students over the school year under the supervision of teachers. So this happened in grade 8 and 9. Depending on schools, depending on countries, there are more or less grades 8 and 9, but basically we're not going to make a difference between those 2 grades. We had a pilot in the first year, in 17-18. We piloted in 3 schools per country. And then when the whole process was clear, we implemented the program at full scale, I mean, at the scale of the evaluation in 1890. So there are two distinct phases in the project when it happens in class. First, there is a preparation phase where the teachers first introduced what this is going to be about, explain students, okay, what is this project? And then they form small groups of students that think about what project could we run. It so happens that the groups of students here were randomized, but we are not at all using this feature of the data at this point. So they're in groups, they think about a project that they could implement. I will give you in a moment examples of what the projects are in practice. And then each group presents its project to the class. We could do this, we could do that, etc. And then the students vote to decide which project is going to be implemented, and it will be implemented by the whole class. So you see the teachers, I mean, it's hard to know exactly how the teachers influence the whole process, etc. But the thing is very much in the hands of the students. They define the project and they collectively decide which one is going to be implemented. It's not the teacher that should be driving the thing. He coordinates, he encourages it, he frames it, but it's very much in principle empowering the students in terms of what is going to happen over the project. And then in the implementation phase, which obviously is more flexible because each project is going to be different in nature, the teacher is going to help the students construct the action plan. But again, the students should be the leaders here in the implementation of the project. So that's what's happening, and there are many projects happen. So, for instance, what it ends up doing is, for instance, collecting food at a supermarket to distribute to homeless people, or some kids they prepared a small play, acting, and went to a retirement home and played in front of the elderly, or same thing, performance in primary school, or production posters aiming to reduce Islamophobia, etc. This is the kind of project. It's quite simple things. Sometimes it's within school kind of thing. So in some cases, they were organizing tutoring to help the students who were less efficient, or so it could be within school, or it could be outside the school, trying to help the people in the environment, in the closed environment of the school. And so the kids in the small group, they were thinking about a project of that kind, each one proposing a project, they vote, and they do it, and then they try to implement it. So that's the substance of the intervention.
Marc?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Sorry?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Do you have a sense of like what's the overall set of projects that were proposed and the topics of these projects, and like which one actually within this were selected? I think that would be quite interesting to see.
Which one was selected among the propositions?
I mean, if there are some topics that seem to be more, likable.
Yes. I know what topics are covered. I'm not sure we have the data on what was proposed and what was voted. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we have this.
So the conclusion, which is like all these three big topics that are covered, yep. Do you have a sense of whether it was all projects were among these three topics, or is it that they only selected these?
So there was a framing for the kind of projects that were going to happen, and as far as I remember, those three large areas were also the three large areas that the project should belong to. So there must have been exceptions and all this, but basically there was from the outset the idea is that the topics should turn around those things for whatever it means, right? I mean, you can. It's probably large enough that many things will fit.
I think that
it was framed. in this way.
On the literature of like how we should teach civic education, which topics actually interest the students, right? So maybe this is where we should go when we think about teaching this. Like, let's talk about what they actually like. I don't know.
Right.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I see. By assumption, the topics should have interested the students somehow because they voted over the things that eventually happened. But of course, they voted over topics in principle, within a limited space, but which is already pretty large, right? It doesn't look like it's a very, very restrictive thing. Take-up was good. So I tell you a bit more about take-up, but basically take-up was good in the sense that in the treatment group, this really happened. It's not a huge amount of hours. So in the survey, the hours devoted at school reported by the teachers saying, okay, how much of my time in school I devoted to this is about 20 hours. It's quite homogeneous across countries. So it's not huge, it's not very small either. And you see the topics, a lot of discrimination, social inclusion, and a little bit of cultural diversity. So the design, first, recruitment process, that's very important for the design. So the ministries recruited the schools, typically at a national level. In some cases, I've seen in Spain and Greece, they, let's see, I'm not sure about Spain actually. In France, we targeted a large number, but not all academy. In Greece, it's only, I don't recall the name, the area in the neighborhood of Athens that was targeted. And in Spain, I think it was about everywhere. Of course, the schools have to be voluntary to enter this experiment. It was very open. They did not target particularly deprived area or the reverse. It was completely open. It was a call, and then schools would say, "Okay, I'm happy to enter this project." So I mean, external validity is unclear as very often in this kind of context. That's sure. It's only public schools. There's a lot of private schools in the Greek system, but here it was only public schools. Well, there are also a lot of private schools in the French system, not as much as the Greek system, I think. And anyway, it's only public school. So of course, we worked on a description of the project and what it implies, in particular, in terms of experimental design, when proposing the schools to join. So it was hopefully very clear for them what they engaged in, and for that reason, I think there were very, very, very few. I mean, in France there was, I think, none, and in Spain there was a few schools that dropped out, but very, very few. I think that the project was understood and followed. Now, a constraint that we have put that was not that easy to implement, but that is very important for the project, is that the schools, if they wanted to be enrolled into the experiment, they had to provide the name of the teacher or the teachers, and most importantly, a list of the students who would participate if the school was assigned to the treatment arm. So we knew beforehand exactly who would be, because it's not a project that is going to be that every teacher would implement, and not every classes either. So they decided that one or two classes would implement the program. And of course, at least for power reasons, you want to know ex ante who are the students and those teachers, so that in the control group, you can survey the proper people that would be treated. And so you can imagine that getting the list of names of students at the beginning of the year before deciding who is treated and controlled is not such an easy thing, but we really managed this in the different countries. More difficulty in England, obviously, but otherwise this worked. And in the 3 countries, we had at the end of the day 217 schools, about 6,000 students, about 1.5 teacher per school, more or less. And they were assigned to, at the school level, assigned to control and treatment according to stratified design, where stratification was based on the variables that we had about the schools beforehand, which is not a very rich set of variables and which are different variables in different countries. But that doesn't really matter. What you want is to group schools by pairs or depending on the countries, or quadruples, and then randomize schools within every strata. So that's the design, and really the listing is absolutely fundamental here to know what we're doing. So let me tell you more precisely about take-up. So the first, aspect of the intervention of the design is to train teachers. So what you see on the first line is that it's participation in 2 teacher training over the 300 and so. So that's okay. Why is it 247? I'm not sure.
Classes.
Was that was your question?
Classes, no.
Yes, maybe classes. It should be at the
just a clarification.
Should be at the teacher level. So I have a small doubt here. I'm not sure why the sample size is a bit lower, but okay. Well, yes, Mina.
Just a clarification about the project. It was like one project. So within a school, there was one project per class that was selected, or it's like one project per school?
No, there was one. So it depends, but there typically was one project per class.
Per class, okay. And so it's
sometimes there were several classes, each with one teacher. Sometimes there were maybe several teachers on the only class, helping the only class that was in the project. So there were many variants. I'm not sure about the details of the variants, but there were variants. What matters to us is that there are kids doing the thing, and there are teachers monitoring. The details are endogenous anyway, so there's little that you can. You could look at heterogeneity with respect to that.
It was just to understand whether it was more a school project or a class project.
No, it's really a class project. It's really at the class level, very much. So you have a few teachers, very few teachers that participated in the training, although they shouldn't have. But basically, the participation rate of treated teachers is very high. They did implement, as they report, they did implement the project very much. And we have a measure of teacher pedagogy index is a measure of how student-centered are the teacher practices at end line. Okay, not regarding the ACT project, but in general. What you say, which we interpret not so much as an outcome, but more as a take-up in a sense, but you may want to see it as an outcome. What we see is that the teachers that were trained and that participated in the project, they report at the end of the year different practices with respect to student-centered activities than the other teachers. We interpret it mostly as take-up in the sense that it shows that something happened. It shows that the teacher really worked in this spirit with the students, and so that the program was implemented in the way we wanted it to be implemented. You can interpret this as an outcome also, saying, okay, by the same token, we've also encouraged teachers to teach differently, and we're happy about that. But that's not really the direct purpose here. So it's more in the take-up table. Now, last line, we have to be careful. I mean, it's not like projects are unknown to schools entirely. In fact, if you ask students, have you this year participated to a citizenship project? You ask this at the end of the year. We have yes answers for 30% of the students, right? But first, in the treatment group, it's much higher. And second, the nature, probably, we don't know that exactly, but probably the nature of those interventions are much more structured the way we want to look at. So but in a sense, you might think of this as an encouragement design where the actual treatment, the share of compliers is 43% or something like this. I mean, I'm only going to show intention to treat parameters, but under your own responsibility, you may want to rescale this by thinking that, in fact, there were projects implemented in the treatment group too, and we're only talking about this discrepancy. But because we know little about the projects in the control group, it's still not easy to interpret. But maybe if you want to think in terms of the scaling, the effects that we find are even stronger than they seem. If you want to think about this in this way. So data. So we have really two different kinds of data. One is based on student and teacher surveys. I'm going to talk about mostly student surveys here, that are conducted at the beginning and at the end of the year, exactly the same surveys in all three countries. So we try to measure dimensions that we identified mostly in the political science literature, either using surveys that existed or papers that proposed some how do you call this scales, okay, validated scales. So we used a number of rather standard things from the literature that we borrowed. So there are really two dimensions for the students that we try to capture. One we call civic attitudes and the other democratic participation. So civic attitudes is mostly about altruism, tolerance, and civic values. And democratic participation is about something that's called political self-efficacy, the idea that people believe that they can be influential in political decisions, their interest in political life. And we also use the fact that there was a day where there was a climate strike for the youth that precisely happened during the year of our experiment. So we asked them if they went to that, if they participated to that strike. So with this, we form basically indexes. So there are numbers of scales for those dimensions and subscales. So I'm going to show you either an aggregate index for civic attitudes, or I will sometimes show you the details of the main sub-indexes that are here. We also measure the student friendship networks by showing to students the list of kids in their class and asking them who they're a student with, who they are friends with. And we have this teacher pedagogy index that I will not, we are a pedagogy survey that I will not discuss very much. All I had to say was in the previous table, actually. And then we have admin data only for France. And for once, this is not depth data. We collected the data directly with the schools. So we have from the schools, from the administrative data in the schools, measures of civic behavior, what we call civic behavior, truancy, late arrivals, and sanctions. And we make a distinction, I think, between severe sanctions and light sanctions. And we also collect the teacher grades that are really teacher grades. They're not homogeneous tests. It's really teacher grades, and they have to be interpreted as such. But still, we believe it's relevant because teachers are randomized in the project. So that's data only for France. So in a sense, the hard data that we have, if we want to call it this way, is really the civic behavior only for France. The rest of the data are surveys that, measure whatever they measure, but we can discuss desirability bias and this sort of thing. So I think that having the encore with the admin data here is quite important to show some robustness of the findings.
Sorry, Mark. So
yep.
the surveys, if you come back to the previous slides, on civic attitudes and democratic participation, this is from the students and the teachers. You have 2 surveys each, or
no, only students.
Only students. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if I so you say, so I give you examples of the questions for civic attitudes. So we ask them if they engage into activities in the school over the last school year. So at baseline, previous school years, at end line, the current school year, and outside the school, trying to capture things that were relevant. Volunteering in humanitarian association, mentoring younger kids, etc. There are answers to this, and then we use more standard scales. So one for altruism scale that is detailed here. You share lunch, you help classmates with homework, etc., etc. Then we try to measure tolerance with questions about whom they prefer to spend time with, depending on whether they are the same religion or not. And then we have a set of questions about civic values that try to measure support for equal rights among citizens in the gender and migration dimensions, etc. Okay, so let's move to the results. So basically, we're going to estimate intention to treat regressions with a model where we have the treatment assignment dummy. Again, in some sense, the compliance to treatment is very large in the sense that teachers attended the training. If you want to interpret it more into the effect of implementing a citizenship project in the class, the take-up is the differential take-up is lower. And we have controls that are chosen by the data using the something very standard, which is the lasso regression. We have strata fixed effects, of course, because randomization is at the strata level, and then standard errors that we cluster at the school level, which is the unit of randomization. So that's very, very, very simple. I'm only going to show you typically the beta parameters in the following regressions. Now, importantly, we want to check balance of the samples. So the variables that we exhaustively observe on either the schools or the students are relatively limited, because much of what we get is from surveys. But at least we can check that treatment and control groups are balanced in those dimensions after randomization. And they are. And then if we want to use surveys, we have to face the fact that there is substantial attrition, 31% for student surveys, 23% for teacher surveys. Oh, that's why I only had 447 observations, actually. Of course, the interest of admin data is that we have a very, very low attrition, only 2% attrition. Right, so the admin data are very useful, at least in France, because we only have them in France to check for randomization. So what we do is that for every single variable that we use as an outcome, so there are many variables, and of course, in fact, the response rate is not exactly the same for every variable, because even if they answer the surveys, the students may not answer that very question. So for every single variable that we consider, we look at, so for every variable we consider, we take a sample where this variable has been answered at baseline and endline. That's our sample. And within that sample for that variable, we check balance. So we check that the response rate is the same in the treatment and the control group. And we check that the predetermined characteristics, that is a large list here because in every sample we consider everyone answered the baseline, so we can use all the baseline variables. We check that they are balanced between treatment and control group. So I'm not going to show you those tables. There are many tables in the appendix but for every variable that I'm showing you, it is the case that although attrition is quite high, the remaining samples are perfectly balanced. And I don't think there is a big issue here. And I mean, in a sense, we were probably lucky with that. So by the way, the surveys where the student surveys were run online. We centralized here at PSC the platform that was translated in the 3 languages, and logins were sent to the schools for the students to log into the platform and run the surveys. And of course, we monitored. I mean, every country monitored the response to the questionnaires as much as they could. But this ensures a very strong homogeneity of the survey process across the country, so that they are pretty much comparable. Okay, so I start with the hardest data, which are for France on behavior and grades. So what you see from this table, so all the variables here are normalized to 0 in the control group. So the control group column is not very informative. And this column 2 is the effect and standard errors, of course. So adjusted p-values. So either we look at the aggregate index. So school behaviors is an aggregate index of absence, punctuality, exclusion, small disciplinary sanctions. And then we don't adjust the p-value for that because it's like we have just one guide. When we decompose an index into sub-indexes, we compute adjusted p-values for multiple testing in the family that we consider. So this is why you have an adjusted p-value column for some of the parameters. What you see on school behaviors is a very strong effect, very precisely estimated, and pretty strong on most aspects of school behavior, except for the small disciplinary sanctions, which may not be a big surprise. In fact, you see that the strongest thing, the gravest thing, absences and exclusions are the ones where you have more effect, and the lighter things like punctuality and smaller sanctions are where you have a lighter effect. And second, we look at grades. Grades, so we look at all the grades. We had all of them. At the time, there was no longer a grade for class behavior, in-class behavior. So we don't have this one. So the grades that interest us the most are history, geography, because this is the closest topic to a civic education, and very often history teachers as the one who are implementing the project. And second, sport. This is in France, right? And sport, it's interesting because if you look at the description of what sport is supposed to do and to convey, there is in fact a very strong emphasis on behavior and civic attitude and tolerance, etc. And in fact, sport in the instructions of the French system it's in a sense, its main function is to convey those values to the students. So it makes a lot of sense, in fact, to look at the mark in sport in this context. And you do find that the two topics in which you have strong effects are history, geography, and sport. But if you aggregate all grades, you also have a strong effect, which is driven by the fact that most grades have a positive effect, but sometimes smaller or non-significant. But if you aggregate all this information, it is still a fairly positive thing. So we do have effects that are, you see, order magnitude is quite large, right? It's 20-25% of a standard deviation. So it's not a very small effect for a 20-hour project run by the kids. So really something happens. Now, if you look at social interactions, now we have data in all countries, there's a little bit of something. Maybe it's not that strong and obvious, but we feel that there is something. So we're most interested. So the number of friends doesn't change very much. But so the idea here is to say, okay, we have the kids do something together, sharing common value, common objectives, etc. So these things in itself might change the social interactions that they have with each other. So it could have been the case that it increases the number of friends. It doesn't seem to be. But we look at heterophily, and there seems to be something happening. So we look at the number of friends of different gender, number of friends of different geographical origin, and number of friends of different social origin. When you aggregate all those dimensions into this heterophily index, you have an effect of about 10% of the standard deviation, which is pretty much significant. If you disaggregate, you don't have that much of significance, but still you see that first, it's a bit driven by the gender thing. And second, again, because all those effects are positive and point estimates are rather large, although they are not very precisely estimated each of them. When you aggregate them, you capture the fact that they all go in the same direction, that this is information, and therefore this aggregation gives you something that is significant. So I don't want to overclaim what is going on here, but there seems to be there are indications. It's indicative that there's also something going on in terms of the social interactions of the kid. Here, what we define by friends are we have a friend when someone says that he's a friend with someone else, and that someone else says he's a friend with you. So it is reciprocal friendship, right? It's not one-directional friendship. So that's a strong type, and this is what we get here. And finally, we can look at the index based on the surveys, and we do find also pretty strong effects. 10-15% of a standard deviation. I mean, not very, very strong, right? But large enough. On those measures, you see that the civic attitude index seems to be mostly driven by altruism, if you want to trust this. And the democratic participation index is mostly driven by political self-efficacy, which maybe, I mean, I don't want to overinterpret, but given that a feature of the project was to empower kids into deciding what they want to do and doing it, it's possible that this is relevant for political self-efficacy. So if there are no questions here, I will move to heterogeneity analysis, which is interesting. So we had a pre-analysis plan where we declared some dimensions over which we anticipated that there could be heterogeneity. So typically gender, family background, a couple of other things whether you are firstborn or not, and one or two things that I don't remember right now. And importantly, experience as a representative. So students who in the past were at least once the representative of their classes. We expected that these people are a bit different with respect to civism in some sense, and therefore the effect of the treatment could be different for them. And we also, of course, hypothesized that the impact could be heterogeneous across countries. So we ran the tables that I've shown you separately for groups for males and females, high SES, low SES, representatives, non-representatives, etc., France, Spain, and Greece. What happens is that we don't find much heterogeneity in those dimensions, except maybe for representative students. It's not like systematic, but there's a feature for representative students. And it's interesting because representative student, in fact, is very correlated with our baseline measures of the civic capital. So it captures something that I talk about a little bit later. And interestingly, there are no country heterogeneity. no significant country heterogeneity, which is a bit of a surprise because there are differences between those countries. But what is also interesting is that if you look at student baseline characteristics in the baseline surveys, in the different countries, they are relatively similar. The kids have sort of the same propensity to have a same level of political self-efficacy in different countries, etc. So in some sense, maybe it's not such a surprise that there are no a very different effect across countries, because the students themselves, maybe the system is different, but the students are not so different. So then we move to a data-driven heterogeneity analysis, where we try to say if there is no further dimensions of heterogeneity that we didn't think about. But when you want to do that, you want this to be completely data-driven to avoid any sort of data mining. And we're using, there's a recent literature on this, which is rather technical, that uses machine learning and adapts it to treatment models, and in ways that are so-called, they call it honest, in the sense that you avoid completely overfitting in the selection of the data of the heterogeneity. So the idea of this, so we're using the Athi et al. Paper on the generalized random forest. The idea is that the thing you do is you split a sample in two pieces. Okay, you build what's called regression trees. So this is non-parametric estimation of the mean of y in a group of people and the mean of y in another group of people. So you start with your full sample. You look at male, female. You look if mean of y for males is very different from mean of y of female. If it's not very different, you're not going to split the sample here. If it is, you're going to have two branches of your tree, one for male and one for female. And then you do it again for all the remaining characteristics. And you start with the characteristics that are for which the mean of y is the most different. So that's a forest. Yeah, that's a tree. You build a tree. Okay. So in this exercise, we include all the list of baseline variables that we have. So it's a very large list, and we let the algorithm decide which variables are relevant to build up the means of y's. And we do that a very large number of times. This is why it's called a forest, because you grow a lot of trees. And then for each individual with some characteristics X, he ends up in one of the leaves of one tree. He ends up in a different leaf in another tree, etc. And you use the aggregate mean of y in every leaf he belongs to build an average mean of y for this guy. Okay, and you use the treatment sample and the control sample to compute the mean of y1 and the mean of y0 for given your characteristics. So it's quite a complicated process. The idea here is to try to estimate a treatment effect that is different for every single person, given xi, okay, given his characteristics. And we use this to then test formally. So what we try to do with this basically is very modest. We just want to check that there is heterogeneity along the dimensions of the observed characteristics. And there is a recent, and now, I mean, it's 2018, but I think it's been published, I'm not sure, the Chernozhukov, Duflo, etc. papers that provides a very simple test using random forest, generalized random forest, to test for the existence of treatment effects. And now the next question is, if there is heterogeneity, which variables are important for heterogeneity? And for this, what this paper suggests is simply to check which variables are most often the ones that generate splits, so that are the drivers of heterogeneity. So this is where it gets you to. So the beta coefficient here is, it doesn't have a very clear interpretation in absolute value. It's a test of whether there is heterogeneity or not. in the effect of the treatment. Okay, so we look at the various main outcomes that we've been considering, and for all of them, what you see first is that there seems to be quite very significantly heterogeneous treatment effect. So we can exclude, maybe it's not big surprise, but we can exclude the homogeneous treatment effect. And second, in the second part of this table, what you see is what are the variables that seems to be mostly driving this heterogeneity. Of course, many variables could contribute, but the ones that contribute most. And you see something very interesting, which is this variable teacher responsibility. So what we did is that we have asked at baseline teachers whether they belonged to school councils. So there are several instances, I mean, there are several councils in which they could contribute in a school. So we count them. I think there are 4, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Depends on the countries, actually. In France, I think there are 4. So they have an index of whether they contribute to, you know, to the activity of the school, what we call teacher responsibility. And that thing is in fact the one that drives most heterogeneity, right? The next that you seem to say is altruism, specifically, so baseline altruism, of course, specifically for civic attitudes, column 4. You also see that for democratic participation, political self-efficacy is also a driver. So it seems that those guys who have more of that quantity are also the ones for which the effect is largest. So it's in the sense of the effect being largest. So kids with more altruism at baseline have more effect of the project on civic attitudes. Okay, when teachers take more responsibility, there are more effects of the treatment than for teachers that were taking less responsibility. And let me illustrate that one. So this is by level of involvement of the teacher in the school generally at baseline. So we cut no, we have low involvement and high involvement. And you see, first, participation in a citizenship project, we don't have much of a difference. So it's very important. It means that what I'm going to say now is not driven by the fact that high involvement teacher implemented the projects or not, right? The effect of being in a treatment group is the same for the two kinds of people. So it's not a dose effect. It's really an efficiency effect. What you say is that teachers with high involvement, when you had a teacher with high involvement, and you were in the treatment group rather than in the control group, you have much higher school behavior, average grade, everything. Low involvement teachers, much less so. Average grades, but nothing else. And obviously, average grades is a bit manipulable by teachers. So it's at the end of the day, it tells us also that we have to be careful about what that really means. But certainly, so I think what's most interesting here is that in a sense, it's not a surprise. We have a teacher effect. We have a teacher effect on the performance of the intervention, and maybe that's the largest source of heterogeneity that we found in the data-driven approach. Here it's by altruism. What the data tell us is that altruism is a source of heterogeneity for the civic attitudes outcome. And we do see that here in the data. We have a large effect of civic attitudes for the kids who had baseline altruism high, and a low effect, no effect at all, for kids who had a baseline altruism low. But it's not that clear for other variables, but the data were not claiming that this should happen either. So it makes sense. So at the student level, therefore, the heterogeneity, the source of heterogeneity is a bit more complex, not as straightforward. But at the teacher level, it's pretty strong. So I have 5 minutes. So for a few questions, but to wrap up, at the end of the day, what we show is that we have a rather low-cost educational intervention. with this pedagogical approach. And it seems to be able to really have effects on civic capital measures under a variety of ways. So it means that this, we call it civic capital, can be influenced by educational interventions. But there is an indication that the program benefits more to students with initial levels of the civic capital, whatever the way we measure it, a little bit of that, which means that there's a complementarity in this production function. People who have more of this already are more able to benefit from this kind of intervention, which also implies that maybe you want to have the intervention as soon as possible in order to put kids on the right track where you have dynamic complementarities. And of course, there is this finding about teacher heterogeneity, which is not unusual. We know that teacher heterogeneity counts. I think it's always interesting to see that in terms of the impact of an intervention, we can have huge differences. And the thing that is maybe more unusual is that usually teacher effects are very hard to predict. Here we have an observed variable that is predictive of the teacher effect, which is their own civic attitude with respect to the school, and I think that is quite intriguing. We have a few minutes for questions or for more questions. If there are any.
I have a question, Marc.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the recruitment of the schools was on a voluntary basis.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't target specifically high or low ECS schools.
No.
Do you know anything about actually the profile of these schools compared to the average schools in their country in terms of social demo, in terms of student civic capital? Do we know if this is a positively selected sample?
So I'm not sure. We don't have this in the tables for sure. I think so. Civic capital we don't know because we don't have measures of this in the general population of students, of course, right? But we could tell you if there tend to be more better neighborhoods. More maybe rural, urban, etc. I think there are no big differences, but these are very rough indices, right? But we can't say much about the certainly the civic thing. In France, we haven't done that. We could use those. No, we couldn't, because we don't. The data that we have here are not at the national level, as far as I know. So we have them for the schools where we collected them, but we don't have a sample for this. So at the end of the day, apart from the variables on which we stratified, which are easily available for schools, but which are very limited, share of high SES parents and these sort of things, we don't have a lot of detailed information about representativeness. That's true.
Thank you.
Mm.
I think in this line, maybe just like descriptive statistics on like social differences by students, like social background in terms of like all your outcomes, right? So, you know, that just like descriptive tables would be pretty interesting.
Sure. So I'm just checking. I think we implicitly have them through some of the appendix data, but it's true that we don't, in the way the paper is written, we don't really have a section to discuss this, which I mean, maybe that's fair, we should.
Because there are papers showing that there are papers in psychology and stuff that show that, for instance, for altruism, like poor people are going to be much more altruistic than rich people.
Much more.
More.
So we look. One thing we did. I didn't show it here, but I'm trying to find it. We looked at, including in order to validate our subjective measures, we looked at how they are distributed along a number of characteristics. So for instance, civic attitude, we have a much higher index for girls than for boys. Yeah. Okay. Or interest in political.
Not surprising.
Life. Not surprising. No, absolutely. School behavior, obviously, right? Absence, punctuality, etc. Girls are much better. Average grades, obviously. Now, if you look at high SES, low SES, civic in this sample, high SES have higher civic attitudes than low SES by more than 10% of a standard deviation. So it's not enormous either. These are the averages, okay? They have high SES have better democratic participation, they have better school behavior, they have better grades. So at least we can describe this. And I was wondering, and of course, representative, non-representative also goes in the same way, right? Representative have much more better civic attitude, political participation, etc., etc. And not so much behavior actually. That's very interesting. Not so much behavior, but the subjective scales are higher for them. But true, we could set our sample more into the general distribution somehow. Yeah.
Marc, I have a question.
Yes.
When you designed the evaluation, did you think at some point about measuring potential peer effect? Like here, you only measure the impact on students who took part in the program, but you could have expected maybe peer effect because teacher may have changed their pedagogy, or maybe peer effects through students. So
yes,
was it something that you had in mind when you designed the evaluation?
I think this is something we had in mind, but I also think this is something we haven't done. And it's a long time ago, so I don't remember the details, but I think it was perceived as quite complicated to also survey additional classes that are not voluntary, that are not treated in both treatment and controls. And I think we decided to concentrate on at least something that would be that would be produced properly rather than trying to do everything. Because it was not in this context, it was not very easy to.
One way would be to use the dev data to look at like all outcomes, right? And look at the effects on other classes.
Yeah.
On the school outcomes, yes, but the dev doesn't have those school outcomes.
Well, educational outcomes, like basic achievement outcomes, right? I mean, if you think that student-centered methods is good per se, not only for this, but also for other stuff.
Sure. But I will not measure in the dev data. I will not measure absence, punctuality.
No. I'm talking about like test
grades. I mean, DNB grades.
Yeah.
We could do that. I'm not sure it's. I don't trust very much that it's worth the effort, but.
I mean, because like the one argument for these types of interventions, I think, is not only that it increases like kind of like, the civic parts of students, but that might just be a tool to interest students in school, right? It's like, oh, suddenly I like school. And because I like school, I'm just going to work more in general, not only on.
Yeah,
true. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
it may change their sense of belonging to school or this type of thing. Yeah, I agree with Nina.
Yeah. Okay. But okay. Possibly. So we have to think about if we could do that.
Well, for this reason, and also for like, because when you look at the literature, I don't know, you have in mind this paper on like teacher effects. There's, I think, to my best knowledge, I mean, there's only one paper that manages to explain teacher fixed effects, which is a paper in which they go on the they go on the field and they observe how teachers are teaching, and they code it depending on how based on like in particular, for instance, how student-centered it is or versus how vertical it is.
Okay.
And that's a way like that explains, that's one of the big explanators of big teachers fixed effects. So
right. Okay, no, fair enough. So we could imagine doing that. We need, but I guess we have them. We need either the ENE or the names of the students that were in the list, because of course we want to identify the students who are not in the list into the dev data. But
you just need the classes. You just need identifiers of the classes, actually.
Yeah, sure. As long as we have them in the way they are coded in the dev data, etc., which I'm not sure we have. But we should have a student level information that is sufficient to do the matching if we were to do it.
Great.
Okay, I think we're pretty much through time. So thank you very much. So in a month's time, Thomas Villemontet will present his paper, and again in 2 months' time we'll let you know. But we'll have on the Friday this thing on math, and we'll try to build the day around the idea of comparing what happens when you experiment things very much in the lab or in very controlled and small environments, more the psychological approach, and the very ecological approach. So in the morning, we'll present 2 papers that are extreme examples of these 2 things. And in the afternoon, Lise Spelke will come and tell her about her own movement from an approach to the other in the Mad Game project that she had with Esther. So she'll try to discuss this move from one approach to experiment to the other. So I hope it's going to be quite exciting. So we'll let you know about this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.